Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to take a look at all the locomotives by type. We get a lot of locomotives in this game. Well, not really. There's 18. But we're going to take a look at the different types and basically their evolutions, and then kind of take a look at each engine separately. This is a video, so the game doesn't really give you any graphical representation of the engines. So when you're looking to buy them, it's kind of like, which one do I want to buy? I'm not really sure what I'm looking at. Obviously, they give sizes and weights, but it's hard to quantify that until you actually see them physically. So we're going to take a look at each engine, go in the cab and see what it looks like to drive the engine, and give you some idea. I will also chapter this by type, so each type will have a chapter that you can quickly jump to down below in the description so that you can easily access the information. Before we get started, I just want to point out I am not a steam locomotive history buff. I like steam locomotives, always had toy trains growing up. I am 50 years old. There were still some steam locomotives running in active service when I was a child, but barely any. But we did see them occasionally. And then, of course, as excursions got popular in the 80s and 90s, I saw a lot of steam action. Does not mean I'm an expert on the subject by any means. But, so I'll give you the best information that I can. It may not be perfect. It may not be exact. But we're going to go through these locomotives and enjoy it. So enjoy the video. Take it with a grain of salt. Have fun. And hopefully this will help you decide what you want to buy as you're playing the game. Once again, one of the difficult things of getting exact information for these locos is that, you know, we have a class of locomotive, but it was not necessarily built all by the same people. So you might have 5 different locomotive companies all building this class of locomotive. So it's hard to identify exactly what this engine is. So I've got some photographs that I've been through. Seems like this engine would have been built around the turn of the century, so right about 1900 to 1905. It's got larger running wheels, which meant that it was designed to, this specific one was designed for some speed. But it was going to be, at this point, probably a pretty antiquated design because, you know, steam locomotives went to the consolidated form, the Mogul, and some of those with more wheels carrying more weight. As trains got longer and bigger. So this is probably considered a smaller engine and maybe the last of its class, maybe the largest that they built of these before they went on to the next class and started building larger locomotives. Not positive on that, but I don't really recall seeing any other steam locomotives of this configuration much into the 19th century. In all the years that I've watched like train spotting videos and stuff, you don't see these very often. So I don't think they really went very far, but I wanted to hit this one first because it's probably the oldest class in the game. You know, the Atlantics probably started back, well, I'll tell you exactly when they started. Really short life on these, apparently. The build dates for these were about 1880s to 1900, 1905 maybe at the latest. Now, interestingly, they did say that the Hiawatha, which is, obviously pretty famous streamlined engine for the Milwaukee Railroad. And I remember seeing video clips of Hiawatha as a kid, is of this class. So it was the first streamlined engine, and it was built on a Atlantic frame. So, but I was incorrect. They are not ancient, basically. They are an upgrade of the 440, which would be pretty much the initial steam locomotive that kind of won the West. But they are newer than some of our other early Pacifics and Moguls and stuff like that. So while those started in the 1860s, this didn't hit till the 1880s. So, but it was a very short-lived engine, once again, probably because, it could go fast, but it was a small engine and didn't have a ton of power, and they just quickly got sucked up in the power struggle that is trains. So here we have definitely an vintage class, if you will, of locomotives. These are the 10-wheelers. So when you had the 4 4.0 setup, they wanted to add an additional wheel. So just like some of these others, the Atlantic did it by adding a small trailing wheel. The 10-wheeler did it by adding another driving wheel. So you had 6 driving wheels and 4 leading wheels. And for whatever reason, this class didn't go on very long. You have a 1906 engine here, ish. I looked this one up. I actually found it, and it was Eastern Railway that had it. I'm not sure what which railway. I can't remember what it was, but it's actually, this engine is actually in Transport Fever 2 also. There weren't a ton of these, but they did use them for a while for passenger service. And then, of course, this is the one that we get to start with. Historically speaking, these probably started getting built in the 1860s from what I read online. And originally were wood burners. So you had a wood burning engine, and it was definitely, an old engine. This cabin's nice. It's got a lot of space, good view out the engine, whereas the Atlantic was pretty cramped. This has got some view. And the Big Brother here is terrible. This one's got a really bad stuffy cab. You have to sit up here. You're crammed into the boiler. What the heck? Not great design here, but that's how they did it. So they could have pushed the cab back, but I think obviously they didn't want it to be too long. So yeah, so that's our 10-wheeler class. Once again, it was kind of had a longer life than the Atlantic class did, though, because we started in the 1860s and ran all the way into the 1900s, early 1900s. Though, and once again, this probably started off as a wood burner. Now, this engine specifically, I don't know if it was built for coal or wood burning, but they have pictures of these with really old school paint jobs, like what you would see on the Wild West trains that had the big spark arrestor stacks, because when you burn wood, it's a lot more sparky. So they had to have spark arrestors on their stacks and not as clean burning as coal. So, but they did make these all the way back then. So it's probably a fairly long-lived class. Next up, we have the Mogul class. Once again, a sort of short-lived class. Not necessarily, though, because once again, the Moguls also started in the 1860s, 1850s. They did have some wood burners, narrow gauge versions, but they are small, and so they didn't, necessarily make it past the early 1900s because they needed larger engines, more wheels. So the 260 just didn't continue. But they started doing 262s and then 462s. Those became kind of the standard and all the way into the diesel era. So these lasted, it seems like from what I saw online, they built Moguls all the way into 1925. And they were pretty popular because they were like a nice balance of speed versus the ability to pull, a decent amount of freight. So they would use them as freight engines, and they were good across flat lands. And so they got a lot of use. They were definitely road engines, but they didn't, survive. As we got bigger and bigger engines, they were scrapped for larger engines. So this one has kind of a cramped cockpit. Once again, if you sit in the seat, you have to zoom the camera way out to see all the controls. It's pretty tight, but not horrible. Opening windows. And I think I forgot to sit in the Atlantic, so we'll sit in it on our way to the next class. Once again, this would be a little bit further on in history, probably about 1910s, maybe earlier, 1905, but somewhere around there. And this engine has nice control layout. Everything's real easy to get to. Decent visibility. This is a good one. All right, so that does it for our Mogul. Let's head on, and we'll stop at the Atlantic. I'll be right back. Here's the Atlantic once again. Yeah, I don't think we sat in here. It's weird that the throttle's like there, but this is pretty cramped. Once again, a lot of the firebox / boiler comes back. The firebox is underneath. This is the boiler. But it's not horrible. Definitely a very narrow window to look out. Obviously, you'd be running this engine probably more head out, which, it gets pretty hot in here, so I don't think the engineers minded too much sticking their heads out. Moving on to the next class, we have the Consolidation class. This is going to be a 280 class engine, and named after, I guess, the consolidation of the Lehigh Valley Railway, all the railways that went into it. They decided to name the engine after that merger, so it's called a consolidation. And these supposedly were the most prolific railway engines of all time. More of these were sold than any other engine class. They said something about, in the USA, something like 25,000 engines, which makes it really hard to identify whose these are, why they're made. But we have obviously different tonnage. This is the early one, the early consolidation, and it's a nice engine, except for this. This is the C25. Terrible cockpit. This is horrible. And once again, I'm not an engineer, but I would think if I was an engineer, I wouldn't really want to be in here because it's really cramped. It seems very dangerous. And if you just bump the wrong thing, you'd be burning your wrists all the time. And it seems like that would be a painful engine to work in. But that's an early consolidation, probably 1870s, 1880s. Moving on to the next one. This is definitely, I think this is a Baldwin Locomotives work because of the arched window. Now, interesting story. When I was growing up as a kid, we used to go down to LTV Steel in Cleveland and drive around down there because it was really cool. And to see all the steel and steel trains, not steam trains, working, pulling different, like the slag cars and stuff like that. It was just, and there's like pipes everywhere, smoking. It was really cool. It was like stepping into the 1950s. It was a neat experience to go down there. So we used to drive around, and one time my mom and I found this abandoned steam locomotive that had the arched window. And it also had this huge firebox, and we took pictures of it. Unfortunately, I can't find them. I was hoping to put them on for the video, but I wasn't able to dig them up. But this is very similar to the engine that we saw, and it was a consolidation that we were looking at. Rumor has it that it did get bought out by somebody and they were restoring it. So, hooray, because that's a good thing. Anyway, so that is the probably 1901, 1905, something like that for this engine. Though could be newer. These are pretty modern gauges, so could be 1920s, maybe even 1930s. They built these for a long time, so once again, it's hard to say when it was built. But in fact, I think this one is larger. This is 143 ton, yeah, and then the newest one, quote unquote, is only 134 ton, so it's actually some lighter. Maybe possibly the USRA model. Of interest, though, this engine, and I want to say almost exactly from what I can see just from the photos, is being used for, or this model is being used for one of the engines at the Grand Canyon Railroad. Number 29 is a consolidated from what was the Lake Erie and Ishemping Railroad, which is kind of near me, not real near, but like 6 or 7 hours away. It's a railway that, look it up, it's pretty cool stuff. Short line railway in Michigan. They used to do a lot of ore, and they used these engines to move the ore around. They had a bunch of them. One of them ended up in the Grand Canyon as one of their engines. So, but it is pretty much this exact type from the photo that I saw. It's identical. Same headlight, same, I guess you call these domes, same stack, just same configuration, same pipes on the side. Very, very much an identical match. And those were built in, I believe they're Ursa, so they would have been World War I possibly that they were built. But don't quote me on that, but I think that's what I read. So it'd be like the 1930s is when these were built. There are several locomotives here that possibly are Ursa locomotives. United States Railroad, or the U.S. Railroad Association, maybe? I don't know. I'm not sure what URSA stands for, but it was the military building locomotives for the war effort. Next up, we have the Pacifics. Once again, these are apparently the most prolific passenger engines, making up 9% of all steam locomotive sales, from what I read. They said America had about 63 or 6,500 of these on the rails, and they used them for passenger service. And you'll recognize that back engine there. I know the Baltimore and Ohio used it. I'm pretty sure the Reading Railroad used it. Chesapeake in Ohio. That's a real familiar engine. This is the one that we bought. Once again, this is going to be more of I think they started building these in the 1860s, 1850s, somewhere around there. And they run all the way into the 1940s, which is probably going to be this locomotive. Is probably like a 40s era locomotive. So we have a 4-6-2 arrangement. These were designed for fast passenger service. They were meant to go fast. Nice spacious cabin. They didn't bother with a window here, obviously, not once it gets hot. So even when it's cold, it's hot inside here. So so this engine is kind of a delight to drive, actually. I have it on my railroad, and I'm pretty happy with it. But the second engine here, which is our big engine, look at the size of the drivers on it. 73 or 75-inch drivers, I think, on this one. Once again, definitely for passenger service. Nickel plate, I think, had these, though I don't quote me on that. But this has got passenger service written all over it. It's got speed. The bigger the wheel, the faster the engine usually. So, but what a gorgeous engine. Once again, I love this. The boiler bulge. I think that's because they have a lot of piping that goes on in there, and they had to make room for all the pipes. You don't see that a lot, but you see that on this engine. Occasionally you do see it, but wow, what a machine. Awesome, huge firebox. And a giant trailing wheel there. Let's hop up inside. This is also the first locomotive that we get into size-wise that has an Archimedes screw. Not really good visibility, by the way, because it is such a large engine. But, they just need to see signals. They stick their face out. And so what that means is we have, if you look down here, there's a tube. There's a big screwdriver that's underneath here, a big screw that's underneath here called an Archimedes screw, that they would have it turn, and it would suck coal from the tender into the engine and keep the fire going, because it's such a large engine that in order to develop pressure, the engineer or the fireman would not be able to keep up just shoveling. It wouldn't produce enough fire to keep the engine hot, so they had to use these machines to twist it in there, and it would blow. The coal would just keep going in all the time, constantly being fed. And another thing I read about this specific engine is that it was one of the best built engines as far as steam consumption. It developed more horsepower than could be pushed out at the cylinders, so it was 100% efficient, I guess. I guess in loco speak, it's still not. They're not super efficient compared to diesel, but it was a very efficient system, and it was a well designed engine. So there's that. Next up, we have a heavy hitter. This is the Mikado, or Mike. These engines were originated in 1890s, I believe. Let's see here, 1897. Yeah. Two of them were built for the Japanese railway, the Nippon Railway of Japan, by Baldwin Locomotive Works. And they referred to them as the Mikados in English. So I guess it was some play or something that they're named after in Japan. And they kept the name. It stuck. And these engines were built all the way through 1944, 45. Used it throughout World War II. They had an URSA version of it. United States Railroad Administration built them. Elko built them. Lima built them. But a very prolific engine. Once again, hard to nail down as far as exactly who made this one, but it's going to be one of those locomotives. But they used it. It could reach high speeds because of its design. Even though it has little wheels. Kind of pudgy. Out the window. There we go. But yeah, it's got a good, decent view. Good looking engine. Definitely power, great for freight. But they said it was because of the way that the firebox was designed. It was a lot larger than earlier engines, and so it got some speed because of that hot fire. So pre-Archimedes screw, but a nice engine nonetheless. And then we have the tank engine version of the Mikado. For obvious reasons, we don't have a tender. We have the tank on top of the engine and the coal in the back. Now, this would be used for like logging, switching, that kind of stuff. So this one, let's take a look inside. My expectation is that you would not be able to see very well, but honestly, the viewing out of this engine is not bad. The tank does take up some of your view up ahead, so you would have to stick your head out to see where you're going. But once you get your head out, you can see just fine what's ahead of you. And of course behind you, because it's such a short engine. There's no tender blocking your view. Maybe you just run backwards. Anyway, locomotive engineers did not run backwards. They were kind of gun shy on that. And in fact, just like I was saying, the GP9, when we get to it, you'll see they used to run the GP9s backwards, like long hood first. The Roadmaster engine, they would do that also. So that's our Mikado class. I guess we already did the Consolidations. I just had them parked over here, so we'll be back. Here's a neat little engine. This is an 030 switcher class. These were built apparently by the United States Railroad Administration in the 1930s to support the war effort in World War I, and continued to build them all the way into World War II. They are, there's I think 5 of them left, they said. Interestingly, 2 of them are near me. One of them is in Sugar Creek, Ohio, static display at Age of Steam. There's a second one just down the road from me in Wellington that is being worked on by I think it's called the Elyria, Lorraine, and Virginia Railroad. It is. I've seen them. They have a very small set of tracks. They're right next to a big tractor dealer, and they're on the western side of Wellington. But they have a little museum there and a couple of rail cars, a working diesel engine, and they're working on restoring this. And I've seen it before. So there's actually a sitting 030 just down the street from me. Or 060, I'm sorry. I called it 030. Oh my God. I'm sorry. 060. But yeah, so they're working on one of these. And so this is once again built by the War Administration to make as a switching engine for yard duty. Great visibility, little cramped, but it's a switcher. I mean, you kind of got to expect that. But you can see out the front and the back pretty easily. You don't really even need to stick your head out, but you can if you want to. You can but then you hit you pull the visor up. There we go. Now we can stick it out. Pretty neat that the visor actually works. Second up here, we have the upgrade for this engine. Same era, basically, 1920s to 1940s. We have an 040, also built by Ursa. Now, obviously, other builders built these too, so I don't know if it was the government that came up with the design or if it was, Baldwin or Lima that came up with it, and then they sold the idea to the government. Probably that was what happened, but same deal as the 3 or the 060. This is the 080 is going to be did I say 040? Oh my God. 060 and 080. The 080 is going to have more power. Obviously, it is a larger engine, so it's designed to pull around in large yards. You could use these on the railroad as road engines. They have little wheels, though. They're not going to be super high top speed, but they're fine for this what we're doing here. But yeah, or you can use them as yard goats. But to the best of my knowledge, these were built for World War I, World War II, to use in the yards as they moved a lot of trains around, a lot of people around, and had to have a way to bump things around the yard. So at least that's what it says in the wiki. Now we have some uniques, 2 unique engines. First is going to be the Decapod, obsolete by 1916. Though used, I think they continue to build them into the 40s, maybe. From what I'm reading online, it sounds like they still can, or maybe 20s. It was a really good engine at low speed. The guys that had mountain railroads liked them and disliked them. They liked them because they could use them at low speeds and get a lot of traction out of them. There weren't a ton of them built for obvious reasons. When you have 5 driving wheels and a stiff frame, a rigid frame, curves start to become a problem. The other issue that they had, and they had this with the Consolidation too, apparently, but with this engine especially, this is a lot of weight. And when this comes up and around, it hammers down onto the tracks. And it would make for a really rough ride. Railroads also complained about having problems with the rails because of the hammering. So these were, at slower speeds, they were really good, but at high speed, they could be a rough ride. And they definitely were, possibly damaging the tracks, putting stress on the tracks. Now, interestingly, in Europe, they did really well. There was a lot of 280s, or 210s that were used in Europe that were successful. But in America, they weren't really. There were a couple there, but it was not a popular type, and you don't see them very often here. So, and once again, here, even in the wiki, it says the Lehigh Valley Railroad purchased several of them in the 1860s. Wow, so they're going way back. But they proved too rough on the track because of their long coupled wheelbase. So that, once again, with the long, rigid body, it's going to push on the tracks, and that would cause damage. And then so no more were built for 19 years. But then they built a couple for Northern Pacific Railway. It used them to pull cars over some switchbacks at Stampede Pass. There was 2 of them, it says, and they were good at low speed because the tractive effort was critical at low speed and on the hill. And only small numbers were built after that for steeply graded mountainous areas where power at low speeds was a requirement. They did not prove as successful as the Consolidation, but there were some users out there. They just were not well received because of the issues that they caused. Oh, and one more problem that they had, I guess because of the way the wheels were, the firebox either had to be really long or really shallow, and either way it caused problems. So they couldn't get it hot enough. It was not a big enough firebox for the engine. But here they are, and it's working. For our railroad here, it seems like it's working. The visibility is not bad, especially with the door open. Yeah, it would work on here great as a mainline engine here. You could definitely use this on this railroad. Once again, Pennsylvania Railroad seems to be the one that really bought it. It says Penske's heavy graded Allegheny Mountain routes where these were used. So the Pennsylvania Railroad is who used these specific engines. So there you go. Last but not least, we have the diesels too, but who cares about those? I like diesels, but we have the mighty Berkshire. Yes. I actually got to see nickel plate 765. If you look up my channel, if you look up Arthur Chapman space 765, you'll see my video that I took of the engine going through the Cuyahoga Valley Railroad. Actually, believe it or not, CVR. It's the nickel plate engine. It comes through my backyard on the way to the Cuyahoga Valley Railroad. So occasionally I'll be on my back porch and I hear woo, and it putts through my backyard, which is awesome. It's so exciting to see it standing on my deck watching a steam engine go through my backyard. There you have it. Berkshires were built, I think they built them into the 20s. Hang on. Anyway, the Berkshire is denoted by the 2-8-4 wheel configuration. Supposedly an improvement on our beloved Pacific. It was supposed to better. Or I'm sorry, the Mikado. I apologize. It was supposed to improve on the Mikado design. And the end result is a very heavy engine. Obviously, it's a big engine. And once again, they were built in the 1920s, 1930s. Over 600 of them were built, and we still have 2 in operation. Obviously, being the 675 or 765, which I videoed, and then also Pierre Marquette has one that is running. And then supposedly there's a place in Ravenna, Kentucky, that is restoring a Chesapeake and Ohio Burke. So really cool engine. Pretty large for this railroad, I think. But I mean, for mainline operations, you could definitely use this to bring large freights back and forth across from the interchange yard out into the route. This is a big engine. I love this engine. This might be one of my all-time favorite steam locomotives. It just is so monstrous. When this thing fires, like in the video, I really suggest you go watch that video. Once again, Arthur Chapman space 765. And if you look that up, there's some good video of it starting up. And if you turn the volume up, you'll hear it. Just the chuffing is incredible. It's like, and it echoes through the whole valley. And it's so powerful. And it makes so much power. Just a really cool locomotive. And definitely a powerhouse of its time. Probably producing as much horsepower as some modern diesels, or more. Very large boiler, takes up the whole cab. Viewing is pretty bad out the front, and they don't even bother letting you open the pen. I can't even see out the window here. You have to lean. You might as well just stick your head out the window because now you can see down the train. But visibility was not great in this engine, obviously. Little tiny window, but that's how they were. It was more about getting the train to run. And you trusted the tower to kind of guide you. 4-man crew, it looks like. Once again, this is going to be an Archimedes screw engine. There it is. Delivering the coal through the Archimedes screw. And that is just... that's a way to end the steam engines, man. That is just the big engine. And it's definitely towards the end of the era. Before we get into the, articulateds. It's just a great engine. Okay, so let's take a look here. We got two switchers. Well, one's a road engine, one's a switcher. We have the vintage SW1, which is just that. It's an SW1. And it was made by EMD, I believe. I could be wrong on that. Sorry. Simplistic controls, decent view. Though there is a big engine hump here. It's hard to see down, but the GP9 has that too. Not anything worse than what's already in real life, and you can stick your head out and see. But it's not bad visibility, honestly. Even as a windshield wiper, imagine that. Yeah, good for moving cars around the yard. This is also a good switcher. This would be considered a road switcher, the general purpose 9, Series 9. If I'm not mistaken, they went right from 5 to 9. There's like a GP5 and then a GP9. And these were built for many years, starting, I believe, in the early 50s and all the way into the 70s and 80s, I think these were built. I'll take a look. Hang on. Interesting thing. No, they really were only built from 1954 to 1959. That really interests me because seems like there's so many. There were 4,000 produced. We still have them on our local railroad. We have a railroad that goes through my backyard once again, and they've got a couple GP9s that they run still. They built. Okay, no, they're saying build date 1954 to 63. That sounds more like it. Okay, so they were built for about 10 years, just under 10 years. That's a lot of engines, 4,000. But we still see them today. There's not very many of them out there anymore, but they're still out there. And it's a good road engine. Like I said, for this kind of railroad, you lash 2 or 3 of them together to pull freight around, and you're good to go. So simple operation, less expensive than operating steam, and less maintenance. Which is why these took over the world and took the title away from the steam locos, because they were just easier to maintain. And they're flexible. Once again, you need more horsepower, well, you just lash another one up. You don't have to add another crew. You don't have to add another tender. You just whip a bunch of them together and off they go. So anyway, those are the 2 diesels that are in the game. You can change the colors on these, which is kind of nice. I do tend to like this kind of Norfolk Southern-y black. Yeah, it's great stuff. Love it. So I love Norfolk Southern. Norfolk. All right. Have a great night, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Once again, I'm not a historian, nor am I an engineer or a mechanical engineer. I'm doing the best I can to give you information, hopefully relevant, cute little snippet tips that will help you understand the engines and enjoy them. But that's where we're at. I will go ahead and mark this, and I'm going to remove the other video. So have a great night. Be sure to subscribe, thumbs up, always help, and we will see you next time. on Railroader.